we're told with Ronald Reagan, where the senior staff meets and there's a message that goes out for the day, or
sure,
you hope to?
We do that.
To do that.
We do, yes. There's lots of different ways to do it. You have a calendar where you plan 3 months out. I'll never forget the day about a month and a half ago when we started planning 3 months out and we ran out of days, and the meeting was much shorter than usual. But you do try to do that, and sometimes there's events or anniversaries. Like if it was the anniversary of the president's announcement of the surge, then you might plan on talking about the surge that day, and then or like yesterday, the president went to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, to the Army War College, and he talked about the transformation of the military and the future of hard and soft power working together. And so we worked things around that and did some echoing around that. You might have seen today the vice president did an interview yesterday with the Washington Times in which he talked about how the president has kept us safe since 9/11. And Secretary Rice did an interview this morning with CNN around that. So we tried to work across the agencies and do everything in addition. Oh, I'm sorry. Secretary Chertoff also had a Q&A today in USA Today regarding the same subject. So we do try to message around things, but also things just happen to you. Sure. News comes to you at the White House.
It's interesting that structure, which was largely what existed in the Clinton White House, and I think probably for the Ford White House too, is largely unchanged since the time of Richard Nixon. It was really Herb Klein in the 1970s that set up this parallel structure of a communications office that really was in product development, message development, and then a press office that had the press secretary out running the retail sales operation. One point I would make, Steve, about the role of the press secretary, and I know you and I have talked about this before. It's very hard to be a participant in the policymaking process if you want to do the job effectively. You're much better if you are kind of the fly on the wall, in at every meeting, watching the interaction of the president's cabinet officers and senior staff all arguing points of view. But once you enter into that process and have your own opinion, everybody all your colleagues know that. And you lose something that I found very valuable. I always wanted to be spun by the people who are actively in the policymaking process. I wanted to hear the Secretary of Commerce give his line versus what the Secretary of Health and Human Services might be saying, because they both come and sort of say, here's what's really important, here's what you really need to know on this issue, because then you could then see how the president was going to sort it all out. And you'd lose that if you were sort of taking your own position. Plus, you would just suffer criticism from people who say, well, McCurry did a bad job on that issue because we know he disagreed with what the president decided to do at the end of the day. So you didn't want to expose yourself to that.
Ron, I know we've talked about one part of this before, the question of getting your information and getting access, not from the president, but from the rest of the staff. The idea that to talk to you is a sort of risky thing, because through your mouth it goes out to all of these nattering nabobs who call themselves reporters. Is that the case?
Well, I really think that's the single most important issue that we could talk about. And everybody has a different concept of the job. My concept of the job was that I was going to answer the questions. I was the president's spokesperson, literally, and that I spoke for him. And he couldn't come down to the briefing room every day and answer questions, so I was going to answer the questions as he would answer them if he were there. It's his viewpoint. And I was often asked follow-up questions like, Ron, do you agree with that? And my answer was, who gives a damn?
Doesn't matter.
I mean, the press secretary is not a political figure. He's not an elected person. He is a spokesperson. He speaks for the president. And so I always kept that in mind, to answer the questions as I thought the president would answer them, which means, the second part of your question is, so how do you get your information? And I think press secretaries get in big trouble when they go to somebody on the White House staff and say, I was asked about so-and-so, what shall I say? And they get spun by somebody on the White House staff who has his own little axe to grind. And I had covered the White House for NBC News before I was asked to be press secretary. And I had this conversation with Ford when he asked me. And I told him this, and I said, I need to get my information firsthand and not secondhand. And he said, that's the only kind of press secretary I want. And I was free to attend all the meetings, listen to the conversations, discussions, and get my information that way. Now, to make sure the historic record is correct, I did have a little more problem getting that done when Kissinger was the National Security Advisor, and he wanted to, in a way, to be his own press secretary. But basically, I think the press secretary has to get his information directly firsthand, or else he can get himself into big trouble.